anxious to get going. So my name is Deborah Safer, and I'm a faculty member here in the Department of Psychiatry in School of Medicine. And my training has very little to do with climate science. So that's my disclaimer, that I don't have much expertise there or at all in the field of entertainment. But what happened was that I read Albert Bandura's book, Moral Disengagement. And his last chapter was about climate change. And he talked about a particular type of scripted entertainment, which we're going to hear about in great detail today. And he, as we will learn about, as we said, it's been tremendously effective globally in bringing about social change on a nationwide scale. He recommended serial dramas as the most promising strategy for significantly shifting people's attitudes and actions towards climate change mitigation and resiliency. And he was very kind and talked to me about this. And I was saying to him, I couldn't figure out why we didn't have a serial drama in the United States addressing climate change, because it made so much sense to me in his chapter that was the vehicle for change that that made sense to me. So I got completely obsessed with the need for a serial drama about climate change. And those who know me know that's all I talked about. So I got completely morally engaged, which was your purpose. And so Dr. Bandura was kind enough to agree to speak. And then he got others to speak as well, and to give a presentation. And I began to talk to experts, including many in this room. And the more that people talked to me, the more generous they were with their time, the more my sense of indebtedness, that I had to do something with all that I was learning. And so that's what led me to use my research funds here to put this event together. And that's why you're here. Thank you so much. This has been the culmination of a great deal of effort on my part, and a lot of pleasure, a lot of learning. And so the hope is that by the end of today, maybe you'll decide that this is something you'll want to continue to be involved in. And we do have sign-up sheets out there, and we have ways to keep you involved if you want to be. Because clearly there's no doubt that we'd be facing a challenge in having a serial drama about climate change made. But hopefully this would be the first in a series of steps that would eventually get us to achieving our vision. One of the key people responsible for helping to get this event off the ground is Sonny Fox, who's going to be our moderator. But before introducing him, I'd like to briefly just go through a few logistics. So we have 4 panelists who will be speaking, and after that, we're going to have a 15-minute break. And I had hoped actually to have everyone have their little dinner box with them right here, but I didn't announce that. So at the break, when you get dessert, you'll also get your little dinner box. So maybe bring that back with you. Then when you come back, we'll have the opportunity to do a Q&A as well as open discussions with everyone here in the room for the remainder of our time. And we're so fortunate to have so much expertise in this room. We have people from the entertainment industry, screenwriters, producers, directors, cinematographers, and from Stanford, we have many faculty and other researchers who focus on the environment, climate, energy, such as from the Woods Institute for the Environment, Change Labs, the Tomcat Center for Sustainable Energy, and other programs and schools represented include the Department of Psychology, the Rhetoric and Writing Program, the School of Education, the School of Engineering, the School of Medicine, the Business School, the Law School, among others. And then outside of Stanford, we have experts from organizations such as the Bay Area Air Commission, I know they were here, yeah. And the Environmental Defense Fund, and we'll be speaking with, and a number of foundations, as well as journalists, artists, therapists, marketers, and more. So now I'm going to turn to Sonny Fox. So Sonny Fox is an absolutely unique individual, and it is really my privilege to introduce him. He is perhaps best known as the television host for the children's show Wonderama in the 1960s, which was a show beloved by Whoopi Goldberg and a whole generation of children. But his career also includes acting as well as producing TV. And before all of this, he was actually a German prisoner of war, and he was captured during the Battle of the Bulge. I'd like to focus, though, on his life since 1972, because that's when he got the call from David Poindexter, and who was a Methodist minister whose mission was to address overpopulation. And from there, Sonny eventually became chairman of the board for an organization that was founded by David Poindexter, Population Communications International. And it was through there that he met Al Bandura and Bill Ryerson, and anyway, and he had a number of, I think, really brilliant ideas. It was really Sonny's idea to have a soap summit where all the writers and actors of 11 soap operas at the time on all the 3 networks got together, and they met their counterparts from Brazil and India who were doing soap operas, who by that time were engaged in some of these serial dramas that we'll be learning about, where they were really showing change. And what happened was the people in the United States, as they were watching what was going on in these other shows, started saying, well, why can't we do stories like that? So eventually, this led to introducing storylines about diseases into soap operas in the U.S. And at one point, he had the U.S. Surgeon General Jocelyn Elders attend one of his U.S. Soap summits. So Sonny knows a great deal, obviously, about the difficulty of changing behavior and the challenges we are up against if we're talking about taking a serial drama model and applying it to climate change. So it's really wonderful and a real privilege to have him moderating this event for us.
Is this mic on now? Are we up? Can you hear me? Yep. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here, and I want to salute Deb for all the work she has done. She has been protean in her time, and her talent, and in her fortune, which has now disappeared. So you won't get a lot of good food, but eat whatever you can. I got a call back in 1972, I guess it was, from a man named David Poindexter, who was very critical in the linchpin in what we're going to be talking about. And I was then chairman of the board of the National Television Academy, and he called me because of that, and he wanted to involve the people who were doing television at that time in dealing with, well, how to use the power of storytelling to improve social and health outcomes. That's pretty much what it is, based on the teachings of Albert Bandura. Now, where is my, I didn't bring that, may I have that? Because I want to introduce Albert Bandura when I mention him by his full title, which I just found out today. I know him as Al, but he is actually the Douglas Starr Jordan Professor of Social Science and Psychology. Okay? Thank you. Sort of. That's, you're so hard to please. And so it began a long, wonderful journey he and I have taken. I had a joint project for 6 years with USC Annenberg and USC Film School, and we brought in 10 people from around the world who were doing these things in Asia and Africa and South America for a 10-week session at those schools and a week in Washington. And every year, Professor Albert Bandura would come down to LA from here and spend 3 hours with our people from around the world. And they were just absolutely blown away by him. The result of that, but I don't want to tell you, give you the impression that we lit the world on fire. Actually, Brazil was doing wonderful things long before we were in using television, serial drama, telenovelas, which are prime time in Brazil. So every night, there are 3 one-hour television series dramas that go on. But unlike our serial dramas, they end. They do them for about 9 months, about 180 chapters, and then they stop and start a new one. I went down there once and spent some time down there. They had wonderful studios. This is 20 years ago. And each studio had its own back lot, which any of you know anything about movies, that's unusual for a television station, much less each studio to have their own back lot where they can build things or do external shooting. Anyway, so we became totally involved in this whole idea that we can change people's behavior. Now listen to me, because we're not talking about information, giving people information. You're going to be having to cope with how do you change their behavior? And that's why Professor Bandura is so important, because he was the one who first led us to understand how we learn behavior. Before him, Skinner was a psychologist of the first half of the 20th century. He was a deterministic guy who said you were born the way you're going to be, and that's it. And Albert put notice how I've gotten from the professor to Albert already. I can't stay too fancy with you, Al. But he put the human being back into the focus. We are now humans capable of changing. And that's the whole point of what we're trying to do here. Whatever the issue is, and we've dealt with lots of issues in Africa, Asia, China, South America, Central America, but the whole point is to change people's behavior. And the key to that is Albert Bandura's research and what he's learned since then. So it is my distinct pleasure, because I have no idea how many more times these two nonagenarians are going to be able to be in the same room together. So it's a special treat for me to be back with him tonight and introduce him to you for your enjoyment and erudition. Would you?
It's interesting to have a 94-year-old introduce a 92-year-old. The other day, I received an email from a high school student who's taking psychology, and he said, Professor Bandura, we have a serious problem, and only you can answer it. Professor Bandura, are you still living? So I wrote back that we have email there, but not Facebook. And now I'm, well, thank you, my dear friend. As a faculty member on the home turf, we rarely get showered with, much wonderful biographies and so on. And Sonny is really a whiz at this. In fact, Fanny's introductions would be sufficient reason for coming to the trip, making the trip here, and so on. In the early 50s, psychology underwent a profound transformative change. And prior to this time, psychologists focused on self-development, on change, by direct experience in your immediate neighborhood. And that's, of course, Skinner put all the emphasis on the environment as the causal factor. And the advent of television changed all this. The symbolic environment was gaining primacy by rapid technological innovations. People could transcend their lived environment, and influential models could change the attitudes, values, and styles of behavior of people worldwide. At this time, I was studying how social modeling works and its scope and power. And it was in this context that Miguel Sabido, Sabel came to Stanford. He showed me his videos of how he extracted a number of principles from the theory, and then he was describing how he was using that information to promote two types of society-wide changes in Mexico, and now we're on the right track. The first drama, in the first drama, he was addressing the issue of illiteracy. The country had developed a very effective model, namely they would provide the primers and they asked readers to help others learn to read, but then there were very few takers. Now, the failure to address the psychosocial aspects of life are really the weakest link in our social policies because they don't address the impediments that people face, and you can provide resources and access and still get no effect. And so one has to identify and modify the impediments to change, and one has to create the motivators for them. They don't come automatically. A prior survey showed that there were 3 major impediments. The first, many people believe that you could learn only as a youngster. The second impediment, they believe that they lack the ability for this complex skill. And the third impediment, they felt that an educated person would not want to spend any time with him. A popular star played the role of the literate person, and she persuades these diverse characters in a study group. And they, of course, they've voiced their self-doubts, and she corrects their misbeliefs and persuades them that they will be accepted into this program. And the video clip then the video clip reassures the person that he'll be admitted.
No estaré ya muy viejo. ¿Cree que me vayan a autorizar?
No sé cómo, don Mario, pero le juro que usted va a presentar su examen de educación primaria.
Now, to build resilience, we have people who experience difficult situations and resistances, and so here's one when he's going to pick up his certificate.
A continuación, vamos a proceder a la entrega de certificados. Don Mario, lo felicito sinceramente. Es usted un ejemplo para los adultos que desean estudiar. Lo felicito.
See, you have music there too. Before the drama, 90,000 enrolled in the program, and during the year of the program, 1 million people enrolled in the study program. The second serial drama promoted family planning to check the cycle of poverty that arises from huge families. And the drama addresses the impediments that women face in having some control over their own reproductive life rather than placing the burden on the shoulders of women for change. And they used contrast modeling, namely there was one sister with a couple of kids, and you see the benefits of a smaller family, and these are contrasted with the life of a married sister who has a huge family, and And then we have the daughter of the poor family serving as the transitional model. She is in conflict because she's rapidly losing control over her family. And the next clip shows her emotional reaction to this problem.
¿Qué tienes, hija? ¿Qué tienes? Tengo miedo, mamá. Tengo muchísimo miedo. ¿Pero de qué, hija? Creo que estoy embarazada otra vez. De eso tengo miedo. ¡Ay, mi vida! Otro angelito más, bendito sea Dios. ¡No, mamá! ¡Y contigo no se puede! ¿De qué no te das cuenta? Tengo miedo de tener un hijo y otro como tú. Mírate, mírame, mamá. Tengo 24 años y parezco una mujer de 30. Y tú mírate, eres una mujer acabada. ¿Qué manera de hablarme es esta? ¿Por qué me hablas así, hija? Es desesperación, mamá. Yo no quiero que mis hijos crezcan en una casa como esta. Si esta casa es un infierno, mamá, ¿que no ves? ¿Que no te das cuenta? Tus hijos están condenados al infierno. Y yo no quiero que me pase eso. No quiero.
When I show this in class, the students say, she shouldn't talk that way to her mother. The family planning centers reported a 32% increase in the number of contraceptive users. And here, if you have the two baseline years, there's an increase, I believe, of 4% and 7%. And then during the actual serial drama, that went up to 23%. Now there are three components in effective dramas. And may I have the next slide, please? The first is a theoretical model. It presents the guiding principles. The second is a translational and implementational model. It converts theory into innovative practice, and Sibel was essentially the responsible for that part. So we had a very effective theory, we had a very effective translational model, but we didn't have either the competence or the resources to present this program worldwide. And the video, and this is where Poindexter and Sonny Fox and Bill Ryerson then provided the third element in Population Media Center. Now the video clip illustrates the production drama as how do you produce these, and this was in Tanzania.
We do listen every week. Well, and if you look backwards, you find that the same thing they are talking there, you have it in your community. So it really educates and gives the example. When you settle down to think, are they talking the truth? You find, of course, they are talking the truth because you've got a kid like that.
One of the main reasons for PCI's success is its understanding of the needs of each area that it works in, with the production teams carrying out detailed research and having direct contact with the people and communities concerned. The methods used by PCI are influenced by the social learning theory developed at Stanford University by Professor Albert Bandura. It's in sessions like this that the real-life research that they've gathered is very carefully mixed into the imaginary world.
Make that crucial decision on whether she should get pregnant or not. Then we also have Mabuche and his drugs problems, and we want to be able to deal with that problem of drugs, okay? We have HIV, AIDS, we have a couple of people that are dying and so forth.
This then is how the stories begin and how they're developed. The production team bringing a diverse and impressive range of talents and experiences. Jumo Mrisho, for example, is not only an actor and writer, but a community development worker.
It's my area, and I must do as hard as possible to take the people out of this mess, or to let them know what they can do so as they can live the better life than as you see.
Dr. Kimani Njogu, accompanied by scriptwriter Herbert Makoya, travels in Tanzania to visit village communities. They drive south from Dar es Salaam to get reactions to the latest episodes of the series 20 Nawakati. This family turn out to be regular listeners.
It seems as if the program has been of tremendous assistance to this lady because she's learned a lot about HIV/AIDS, about family planning, about the importance of education. This type of dialogue that is initiated by the radio within families is life-saving. I mean, we are talking about HIV/AIDS, we are talking about the possibility of death.
PCI's work is really right at the heart of the future. And to think with just a few pennies, these messages can go out so far and so wide to so many people who deserve to have the information, to erase the inequities that come about through lack of knowledge.
Now, these dramatic productions are not fanciful stories. The plot lines portray people's everyday lives and the impediments they face, and they help people to see a better life, and they provide the strategies, the incentives to take the steps to realize their hopes. And hundreds of episodes over several years allow viewers to form emotional bonds to the models, and viewers are inspired and enabled by them to improve their lives. And there are several, and there are several basic principles that guide the construction of these change programs. The slide, please. The first is contrast modeling. The episodes include positive models exhibiting beneficial lifestyles, negative models exhibiting detrimental ones, and transitional models who change from positive to negative. And viewers are enabled and inspired by seeing people like themselves succeed. The second is the vicarious motivators. Unless people see the model lifestyle is improving their lives, they have very little incentive to change. And the benefits of the favorable practices and the costs of the detrimental ones are vividly portrayed, depicting outcomes, provide incentives for change. And the third one involves intentional and emotional involvement. To change deeply held beliefs, the social practices require very strong emotional bonding to enabling models. And they exemplify the vision of a better life and the realistic paths to it. People form emotional ties to the models who speak to their hopes and aspirations. And in Tanzania, there was a woman who ran into one of the negative models at the market, and they drove him out under the rain of tomatoes and mangoes. So they take these characters seriously. And the fourth one is emotional supports. It's of limited value to motivate people for change if they do not have the resources and the environmental supports to realize those changes. And the In this approach, we have a dual path of influence. Next one. Our model of social change is designed, as I say, to work in two ways. In the direct pathway, media influence promote change by informing, enabling, motivating, and guiding viewers to improve their lives. In the socially mediated pathway, media influences are used to link people to social networks and to environmental supports. Now, these dramatizations are aimed at building people's sense of efficacy that they can improve their lives. And this core belief is the foundation of human aspirations, their motivation, their emotional well-being, and their accomplishments. Unless people believe that they can produce desired effects by their actions, they have no incentive to act or to persevere in the face of difficulties. So whatever other factors may serve as guides and motivators, they are rooted in the core belief that one can effect improvements in one's lives. Now, both individual and group efficacy are developed by mastery experiences and by social modeling. Next slide. And this is the creed for how you do it. And these modes of influence are wonderfully illustrated in Lynn Sherry's film series on young voices fighting for a habitable future. The power of social modeling in building self-efficacy is enhanced by perceived similarity to the activist models. And this is illustrated in the first video.
When I was watching the Young Voices for the Planet films, I'd never seen kids in action before, and it was really, really amazing. And I realized that there was nothing different between me and the kids on those screens, and I could be doing what they were doing.
Now, acting on a resilient sense of efficacy, the youngsters then went to Lexington and persuaded the government there to outfit all of their public buildings with the panels.
It is unanimous. The motion carries.
We literally just skipped out of the town hall.
We had helped to get solar panels on all the town buildings. We weren't just helpless little girls.
We have more power than we'd ever imagined in our wildest dreams. After that, it was like,
well, we did that. What can we do now?
So what they did, they generalized their success, and they had their own school equipped with the solar panels.
We realized, wait, we have a new school. We can put solar panels on our new school, reducing CO2 emissions and really doing something about climate change. Our whole school will be helping save the world.
We need to go out there and take a risk to make a difference.
We're taking it into our hands now.
Seeing that we do have power and that we can make a change in the world, it's really inspiring. It really changes you. And I think it's just gonna grow from here. So find your team, find your passion, find your power.
Nine-year-old in Germany, inspired by Matthias's Green Belt movement, founded Planet for the Future now, and they are planting a lot of trees. Next one.
2 years ago, after the warm winter, my teacher asked me to give a presentation about the climate crisis.
Felix came home and said, hey, I have to make a PowerPoint presentation next week. I said, but you need Papa. I have no idea how to do that.
But finally he worked out by himself. He was researching in the internet and he learned about Wangari Maathai.
I found out that Wangari Maathai planted 30 million trees in Africa in 30 years. So I thought if Wangari Maathai can plant 30 million trees, we students in Germany can also plant 1 million trees.
These efficacious voices even recruited Pete Seeger in their fight for their future, and they had a Granny Award for it.
Pete says a lot of things, like we are carrying on what he did.
Young one stronger.
So we have to live up to that.
Now, I recently expanded my theory to the area of moral disengagement, in which I demonstrate the pervasiveness of moral engagement in virtually all of our social systems. And I published in the book Moral Disengagement. And that has a huge chapter on moral disengagement in the environmental issues. Now people are informed. If people were informed of the methods of moral disengagement, they would see through them and they would lose their effectiveness. And so we should make it hard for people to remove humanity from practices that degrade the quality of life for future generations. And so the kids felt that maybe the adults are irresponsible, so maybe they should take control for it.
So when we were little and we were first hearing about climate change,
It was on the news, it was in the papers, our parents were talking about it.
I just felt despair. It was worse than concern. It was just sadness. I didn't think there was anything anyone could do.
We got older and we realized that the grown-ups weren't doing anything about it. We kind of lost our faith in adults.
If they care about us, they should care about our future too.
No one was going to protect our future for us, and so we were on our own.
Well, in some, psychology provides very reliable principles for affecting society-wide change. Bill Ryerson really is applying these principles creatively worldwide and bettering people's lives. And Bill will show you what he's been up to and up on the front lines.
What a wonderful reunion you have organized for those of us who've worked together for 4 decades. This is really so wonderful. And it occurred to me as we were watching these videos that Miguel Sabito, who's a spry 80-year-old, should come to the next one. He will be the keynote speaker at the Social and Behavior Change Communication Summit in Indonesia next month. So he's still going strong. He retired from Televisa in 1998, the year I founded Population Media Center. Are we okay? Oh, that's the clicker. Thank you very much. And has been doing plays on the stage in Mexico City, but still remaining very active and interested in the application of the methodology that he created on the basis of social learning theory and his own experience as a telenovela producer. I've had the privilege, as I said, of working with Sonny and David Poindexter And I'd like to make a comment about David. He really pioneered this field. He pioneered the field of Hollywood lobbying. He was, as Norman Lear said to me over dinner, David was the one who got Maude pregnant in the two-part series where Maude had an abortion 6 months before Roe versus Wade. David was involved in the idea of having a vasectomy for Rob Reiner's character, we fondly called Meathead on All in the Family. So at any rate, David passed away last month at 89. But he worked at the Population Institute, and I worked there with him in the 70s, and then in the 80s, he spun off and set up Population Communications International. And Sonny, whom David had known since '72, became chair of that organization, and I joined as executive vice president. And then when David retired in 1998, I started Population Media Center. And just before that, set up the research in Tanzania that Albert Bandura was talking about. That had a treatment, or several treatment areas and a control area. And the control area got music while the rest of the country got the soap opera. And during the time of the soap opera, which was twice a week for 2 years, so 208 episodes, 58% of the population in the broadcast areas listened, while 2% claimed to have heard it on shortwave in the control area, which was immaterial. And it dealt with HIV prevention and family planning promotion, among other things. And the data was stunning. Among the 58% who were listening, 82% said the storyline related to HIV had caused them to change their own behavior, with most of them reducing the number of partners or going to monogamy, and then many of them, the second most common change was condom use. Now, without hiring a lot of private detectives, there's no way to verify either of those claims, but we got the condom distribution data from the National AIDS Control Program broken down by district. And in the districts that made up the control area, where they got all the other national AIDS awareness programs, but not this soap opera, there was a 16% increase in condom distribution, while in the broadcast areas there was a 153% increase in condom distribution. And I got the Minister of Health, Fatma Marisho, to have healthcare workers at ministry clinics ask new family planning adopters why they had come and to give us their data. In the control area, there was zero change in the number of family planning adopters. In the broadcast areas, there was a 33% increase, very similar to what happened in Mexico. And when asked why they had decided to come to the clinic to adopt family planning, 41% of them named the program by name. And then Peter Vaughan, who was involved in that research along with Everett Rogers, did a calculation of cost per behavior change. And this, I think, is the ultimate reason why I've made this the focus of my career. The cost per person of the entire 208 episodes in primetime distribution across the country, and all of the research costs divided by the number of people who adopted family planning and attributed that decision to the program, came out to 32 cents. The cost per person who changed behavior to save their life by avoiding HIV infection was 8 cents. So I said, okay, if you can save lives at 8 cents a person, this is really important. We need to get this on a global scale. And since David was retiring, I set up Population Media Center to focus really on sustainability issues, including population, but also deforestation and loss of biodiversity, climate change, and various other issues, all centered on the rights and status of women and girls. And I'm just going to start off briefly making a point that a lot of people at conferences like the Paris Conference on Climate Change don't mention population, but in fact, roughly speaking, and I have to admit this is a rough calculation, at the low per capita carbon output of the average citizen in a developing country, which is much lower than it is in the West, the anticipated 2.5 billion additional people from now to 2050 is the climate equivalent of adding 2 United States to the planet. So it's not insignificant. Bradshaw and Brooke wrote in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, well, don't worry about that. It's a giant tanker and you can't turn it around. So forget about population as an environmental issue. Let's focus on technology. To which Bob Walker of the Population Institute did a publication responding by saying, actually, if we stop using fossil fuels today, that's not going to solve the climate problem. We're too far into it. There is no quick fix. And indeed, Brian O'Neill at University of Colorado Boulder did a very detailed calculation, not like my back of the envelope one, in which he calculated that between 16 and 29% of what is necessary to avoid catastrophic climate change can be achieved by promoting a significant effort in promoting family planning, stopping child marriage, and various related issues. So it's not 100%, but it's also not zero. And it, in many ways, is the least expensive of the interventions. Two Oregon State University statisticians then sat down and said, well, with the American per capita carbon footprint, what happens to an individual's carbon legacy if they reduce their family size by 1 child? And the conclusion was, and carbon legacy is a little bit of a complex term, but it's this generation plus the next 2 generations making some assumptions about increased efficiency at each step. So it's not the same as one person's lifetime, but reducing an American couple's family by 1 child is a contribution to reducing the carbon legacy 5.7 times greater than the carbon output of the average individual. So again, important in countries like this. And obviously reducing rapid growth that's leading to poverty and greater vulnerability in developing countries also reduces vulnerability to rapidly changing climates in places like East Africa. And as I said, a condom is a whole lot cheaper than a condominium. So this is one of the least expensive interventions with regard to climate change. But back to family planning and where it has gone since some of us got involved in this field. So in 1960, 10% of the world's couples were using modern methods of contraception. Today, 56% are, although the 44% non-users of today outnumber the 90% non-users from 1960 because of growth in the population. So we still have a big challenge ahead of us. But the people who were ready to use family planning when it became available, particularly in the 70s and 80s, have done so. And those who are not using family planning now have, it's about a little less than half of the adult population, have as their reasons, number 1, wanting bigger families, and number 2, cultural and informational barriers among those who don't want additional children. And those cultural, a lot of people assume it's just lack of access to services, but in fact, among people categorized as having an unmet need for contraception, that is, not wanting a pregnancy in the next 2 years and not using a modern method, less than 1% in most countries state that the reason is they couldn't find a method. So the top reasons have to do with the rights and status of women, their inability to make their own decisions, daughters being married as children rather than sent to school, male opposition, religious opposition, fatalism, and some lack of knowledge. But in fact, fatalism is underlying a lot of those reasons. And indeed, there's a fascinating paper by a scholar named Etienne van der Waal, in which he looked at the interviews with women in the demographic and health surveys that often went like this. Are you married or in union? Yes. Are you sexually active? Yes. Are you using a modern method of contraception? No. Are you interested in being pregnant now or in the next 2 years? Desperately not. I can't feed the children I have. Are you aware, by the way, thank you for your interview, by the way, are you aware that since you're sexually active and not using any contraceptive, you could become pregnant? Yeah, well, that'd be okay. But I thought you just told me you couldn't feed your children. That's true. So how is it okay if you become pregnant? If God wants me to have another baby, I'm here to serve God. End of story. So the lack of self-efficacy is a key driver of unplanned and unwanted pregnancy. So these cultural and informational barriers are what Population Media Center is working to address. So far, we've worked in 54 countries using this strategy. We've produced over 40 television and radio serial dramas addressing human health, human rights, and environmental issues. And we've reached 500 million people so far in programs that, as you've heard, are designed to entertain and captivate the audience and get them in love with the key transitional characters, some of whom go in the wrong direction and suffer the consequences, and many of whom move in the right direction and realize benefits and show the audience how to overcome the obstacles to change and the benefits of the new behavior, and how to deal with the pushback that comes when somebody tries something non-traditional. So role modeling, obviously, Albert Bandura is the role model for all of us in terms of how to design role models who will be highly effective and what makes a role model more or less influential with the observer. And as he has mentioned, we have positive and negative characters who create the drama and who battle over issues, and then these middle-of-the-road characters who represent segments of the audience and eventually sort out in front of a mass audience who's right and who's wrong and evolve into positive role models. So the back and forth by the transitional characters is one of the things that leads to audiences sitting on the edge of their seats. I bet there are a couple people in this room who know the origin of the term cliffhanger. Sonny, do you know that?
I do.
Would you like to explain it? No. Oh, okay. Well, The Perils of Pauline was a series of films, Saturday matinees, where Pauline was dealing with an angry boyfriend. And one time he ties her to the railroad track, and they cut the film, and the train is coming towards her, and they cut the film, and they say, come back next week to see if Pauline survives. So everybody pours back into the theater the following week, and miraculously, she unties the rope just before the train is going to hit her, and she rolls away. But by the end of that one, he's thrown her over the cliff, and she's hanging there like that, and they cut the film. And that's where the term cliffhanger came from. So anyway, we use cliffhangers throughout the program to keep the audience coming back, and pretty soon they become addicted in a positive way. Now I'm going to just briefly, the final thing, talk about the impact of one of these programs since Population Media Center got started, and this was Sali Wansai, the name of a program we did in Sierra Leone. 208 episodes twice a week in the Creole language. And if you don't speak Creole, when you want to ask somebody how they are, you say, how the body? And it's like, how the body? And the answer is, the body fine. Thank you beaucoup. So anyway, it's a fascinating language of which that's all I've learned. But we had a huge audience. In fact, the Endline survey showed half the population reported listening at least weekly. So it was a huge hit. And so then we did an Endline survey in which we compared the changes among listeners and non-listeners to see if the listeners had made more progress on our indicators. And then, because listeners might be demographically different from non-listeners, we ran multivariate controls to factor out income, education, and place of residence. And the resulting impact data is expressed in the terms of likelihood. So after running multivariate controls, a listener was almost 4 times as likely as a non-listener to have heard about obstetric fistula. And if you don't know what obstetric fistula is, you should have been listening to Sali Wansai. But it's a condition caused often by child marriage that leads to obstructed labor, that leads to incontinence among women after childbirth. A listener was 2.5 times as likely as a non-listener to know that having 4 or more children can put the health of the mother at risk, twice as likely to believe that access to contraception would not encourage infidelity. This is a big barrier among men. So the fact that we doubled the belief that it's okay to have access to contraception that won't lead to infidelity was a huge factor in changing men's attitudes about the acceptability of using family planning. Listeners were almost twice as likely to intend to use the method of family planning, 1.5 times as likely to say that they talked to somebody else about family planning. And for me, the clincher is this one. 1,525 reproductive health clients were asked, why did you come to the clinic? And 50% of them answered Sally Wants I, the name of the program. So theoretically, this program may have doubled contraceptive access or use during its 2 years on the air. In the US, we have branched into doing a US program, and Kathy is going to give a talk about that. I'll just say PMC created the program East Los High, and we've worked with Wise Entertainment over 5 seasons of what has become the #1 show on Hulu Latino, dealing with teen pregnancy among American Hispanics. It's in English with a little Spanglish thrown in. In the first month of 5 years, 27,000 people linked from this show to Planned Parenthood's website. And it has become such a hit that we've decided to do a bunch more shows in the US. We had originally focused on developing countries, but we now have several other shows in development, one based in Harlem dealing with the lives of African American youth and the drug abuse, the school dropout, the violence, the teen parenthood, and other issues that they're grappling with. Are we going to play Frank's video now? Oh, all you need is Windows Media Player. It worked for me. Anyway, well, I'll just mention him then. He did a little hello. Has anybody here heard of an obscure show called Game of Thrones? The producer of that is going to do a program for PMC very soon. He's ending Game of Thrones with the final season and will be a producer of one of our next US shows. And I think it's going to be very exciting, so stay tuned. So far, these are the countries in which we have worked, and these are the actual countries by name. We just added Zambia 2 weeks ago. We got a grant from USAID, and we're going to be doing 2 shows there. But as you can see, we've worked all over the world and measured, like the Sierra Leone program, significant effects on behavior on multiple issues at once. We like to do multi-issue programs because nobody wants to go home at night to watch the recycling soap opera. But if you deal with a bunch of issues simultaneously, to them is like a program about life in the country. So these are the currently active programs we have. Thanks so much.
Oh, you come a long way with PMC. When I was, I met Bill. Bill, I met you probably way back in about 1972. Yeah, I got a call, and of course, when I was chairman of the board of the academy, as a result of that, we did the big. I wanted to bring that into the mainstream of American television, so we planned a conference in New York at the Plaza, I think it was, and David got John D. Rockefeller the third, fourth, or whatever he was, to be the keynote speaker, with David, we were able to get the president of CBS, and we had on the dais, I had every head of every ad agency in America pretty much up there. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take this into the mainstream of American television and make it kosher for them to be involved and to do it. And we did it that day. We stayed. 500 people came from all over the television community, and that was a dramatic, kind of compelling transition from this little kind of thing into a much wider acknowledgement of the fact that this was a unique and important new development. And matter of fact, Bill and I, in 1972, we went up to the CDC. I don't know if you remember, we had a meeting at the CDC with Dr. James Marks, who was the head of the division, what I call the killer disease division. It was called chronic diseases, you know. I said, you'll never get on the cover of a magazine with chronic. That's no, you know. Let me call it the killer disease division. I'll get you on this. But at any rate, they still thought, the CDC in 1972 still thought pamphlets was the way to communicate. I drew them into our soap summits gradually. Jim was very supportive, and I used to get briefed by their people as to the issues every year, and then we'd help select people. And every year we drew in the the head writers, the executive producers, and the network heads of daytime. Of course, at that time there were 11 soaps going on in this country simultaneously every day. 20 million women watching. That was a pretty good audience to reach. And we worked with them every year, and the CDC got more and more involved. They began to back us with money. And then the lady I was working with as a liaison at the CDC moved to California. Her husband had retired. They didn't want to lose that connection. They managed to get her installed at the Norman Lear Center. And that is still going on, except the CDC just dropped the funding under the new administration. However, they have other funding that will keep them going. And I'm glad to be able to talk about that because Kathy, our next speaker, is where we first kind of got involved with each other and passed straws because we were very actively involved with them. So that institutionalization of CDC to aid writers and producers and other people right in the heart of it in California at the center there, Norman Lear Center, was so wonderful to have developed out of all of that. Anyway, Kathy is now with Wise Entertainment, which is the company that grew out of what they were doing with Bill's company. I'm sorry, yes, with Bill's company, that produced East Los High, and they're doing some wonderful other stuff. I mean, they're doing Kate is doing 9 episodes with, where are you? 9 episodes with that, what is it? Reese Witherspoon. Yeah, okay. So I'll let you talk about that because that's very exciting. And she was herself involved working with the leading writers in various shows for many, many years, and over at the Norman Lear Center at the Annenberg, and now is a vice president of Wise Entertainment, which is where it transitioned out of PMC, and now they've left PMC and they're going independent. So they're doing a lot of other shows. But I want her, listen to this, because we are very 20th century. Well, you've made the transition, but some of us are very 20th century. And I'm struggling to stay with 21st century technology. I sometimes really want to go back to dial-up phones and 3-cent stamps. Slower, but so much easier. Anyway, Wise Entertainment and East Los High showed how the 21st century technology can dramatically expand the reach and the impact of a soap opera with our new technology. So part of what she is going to talk about is that. Kathy, may I invite you up?
I just wanted to start by saying thank you to the organizers, Deborah, Sonny, thank you. I'm so crazy honored to be here. I'm like starstruck because of Dr. Bandura. I did a master's degree in public health with a focus on health communication and studied your theoretical constructs. And so I saw George Clooney the other day and wasn't even this starstruck as I am with Dr. Bandura. So if I'm nervous, please excuse me. And I'm honored to be on the stage with you and with Bill. I'm here because of them. So thank you. I'm super honored, and I'm excited to talk to you today about East Los High and Wise Entertainment. We're based out of Los Angeles. We're a production company that focuses on content that is striving to affect social change, to change the narrative, but where women and underserved audiences are at the center of the narrative. We employ a 4-pillar, a holistic approach. All have roots in what Dr. Bandura and Bill talked about, which I'll walk you through using our case example of East Los High. As Bill said, we have 4 seasons under our belt and a finale episode that just aired last December. Sadly, Hulu has ended our show. It was the first English language show with an all-Latino cast, the longest running Hulu original, 5 Emmy nominations, and consistently ranked as one of Hulu's top performing shows. It originated with the mission to address the issue of teen pregnancy. I think in 2010, the statistic was that 52% of Latinas were getting pregnant before the age of 20. And so this show set out to address that issue. But over the course of over 60 episodes, we've ballooned to address many other different social issues. But to address these issues effectively, having a strong research component is paramount. Similar to what Bill outlined and what he's doing around the country, we did that for East Los High. In terms of formative research, we're not just understanding the issues, but we're also understanding the cultural zeitgeist. Through traditional literature searches and interviews, but also focus groups, sitting down with students in East LA, elementary school or high school students, hearing from them things that we would never learn from a white paper alone. So being able to go into the communities and understand them and understand the issues and their day-to-day life, these are all nuggets that help inform the tensions, the conflict, the drama, the stories that we weaved into East Los High. But we're not experts in these issues. And so a key component is leveraging partnerships with different organizations, partly because, again, we're not experts, but also Hollywood doesn't fund this kind of research. And so partnering, for example, with the Ford Foundation to help support this kind of work allowed us to go deep into these issues. For East Los High, we had an advisory committee of over 20 different organizations. This is a sampling of organizations at the national and local levels who are the soldiers on the ground in terms of these issues. And so we sit with them before, in the case of East Los High, before any season started, we're sitting with them, understanding what the issues are, what are new issues that are popping up now. Again, using them to speak directly with community members. And all of this, and they advise on scripts. I think I'm the only, we're the only producers in town that get notes from 20 different organizations on top of studio notes and network notes. And we take each of them very seriously. It allows us to represent these stories authentically, responsibly, but also allows us to be thorough. We don't just look at these issues at an individual level, we're looking at the systemic reasons as well. And again, these partners advise on us through all steps, not just at the beginning, but throughout. They advise on even when we're designing a set, to even, sometimes letting them listen to some of the music. Does this set the tone right for this scene? It's really important. And then we engage with them when the show airs to make sure that we're leveraging each other's outreach to share the show and the resources. But first and foremost, these issues need to be portrayed in an entertaining way. The audience for East Los High, if they get a whiff of PSA, after school special, eyes glaze over, we lose them. And so, preachy messages. And so it's really important to us to have entertaining narratives, complex characters, universal storylines. All of us can relate to stories of love and heartbreak, loyalty, family. In the case of East Los High, Jacob was in love with Jesse, but also Jesse's cousin, Maya. And we've all been through that, right? And characters that our audience can relate to. Again, this is really harkening back to Dr. Bandura and role modeling and identifying with these characters. They're more likely to change behavior if they're identifying with these characters. And so we take a lot of work into making sure that these characters are relatable. And in the case of East Los High too, we were putting Latinos up on screen, and we heard so many comments from our viewers where we heard, this is the first time I saw myself on the screen, and that meant the world to us. And as Sonny was talking about, we employ a multi-platform strategy, also known as transmedia, in which our world and our characters expand into. It allows us to go deeper into the stories, into the issues, into the characters, because we have to keep up a certain cadence of drama in the show. In the case of East Los, every episode was 23 minutes. And transmedia, having all this ancillary content, allowed us to go a lot deeper into the issues and also share resources to continue the role modeling. This is a sampling of all the different transmedia pieces that East Los High had. And here is a reel of all that I just talked about into practice with East Los High.
Grind me thirsty, grind me, grind me thirsty, grind me.
We urge you to speak up and give someone with no voice a voice.
We do what we need to do to survive.
Where were you last night?
How about we meet up later and I'll help you out?
So what do you want? I want to win. I'll dance with Caleb.
Not buying drugs.
But you said you'd do anything.
Just busted my back, remember? Grind me thirsty, grind me thirsty, grind me thirsty. Get on, 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 get on. Girls, we run this mother. Yeah. Girls, we run this mother. Yeah. Girls, we run this mother. Yeah. Girls, we run this mother. Girls, who run the world? Girls, who run the world? Girls, who run the world?
Sassy Kamayo, will you marry me?
Yes.
Stupid bitch!
It's a safe place for you. Thank you so much. If you know someone like Ceci, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
Yeah, but who wants to talk about their father molesting them? You're not to blame.
But instead, you didn't say anything and you just started to cut.
It's healing.
I've never used a dental dam before.
Are we together or what?
I'm just becoming comfortable with who I am.
The only thing positive about you is your HIV status.
And proud. This is the High V blog. Mitch, are you recording this?
I'm Vanessa, giving you the 411 on HIV for free. When I first found out, I couldn't even say what it was. I was in denial. Where did you learn so much about HIV? You can check out sexetc.org. I got a few good pointers myself, if you know what I'm saying.
Welcome to another edition of Ask Paulie. If you got any questions about sex or dating, you could click the link below. What is LGBT sex like? Are there any boundaries to sex talk in bed? You can get an STI through oral sex or vaginal sex. A woman's body belongs to her, and it should be her right and only hers to decide what to do with it.
You shouldn't even be in this competition, let alone this country.
I've lived in this country my whole life. I'm just as American as you are.
They came.
Who's they?
Immigration. They took everyone.
That's why we gotta keep speaking up and coming together. I mean, so we can be a part of this country and vote and finally be proud to call this place our home.
Welcome to Gape Camp. Taji's gonna teach us a move right now.
When East Los High was brought to Hollywood, I think it got a total of 13 different offers at various different networks. But Wise Entertainment went with Hulu. Why? Because it was about the time when streaming was starting to become popular. And knowing our audience were young people who are always on their phones and laptops, we knew that it was the future of where TV was going, where they were getting their media. And because of the very robust transmedia experience that accompanied the show, we knew that a network like Hulu was the most appropriate. And as you saw through that reel, the transmedia components are just as important as the main show to us. They're not considered as the DVD specials that are an afterthought. They are conceived at the same time as the main show, and we take just as much care and attention to it because they're bite-sized pieces that can go viral and provide the show with multiple touch points and again, allow us to go deeper in a lot of these issues. But also, we're not just using the show to raise awareness about these issues, we're also using transmedia to help close the loop. We are using transmedia through social media, our website, these shows to share resources so that they can take action, so that they can share information with their friends. And so that's a really important component of East Los High, but also of all the other content that we're producing. We also do a lot of summative research. Our impact evaluation for season 1 was the most robust. These results can be seen in an article published in the American Journal of Public Health. We were so grateful to work with Dr. Arvind Singhal and Helen Wang, who are lead entertainment education researchers. For season 1, we had a multi-pronged approach, one of which included a lab experiment. We had 5 different groups. One was a control that did not receive any intervention. One received non-dramatic text, so it was health information in the form of a news article. Another group received the script. Another group received watched a dramatic feature, so they kind of took season 1 and whittled it down to about a feature-length video. And then the 5th group got to watch that video, but also was exposed to all of our transmedia pieces. For season 1, it was like over 12 hours worth. And I'm going to share the results of that shortly. The evaluation also included interviews, surveys, and also looking at social media analysis and web tracking. These are some of the key findings from that. 1/3 learned something new about birth control and emergency contraception. 40 to 50% learned information about the correct use of condoms. Almost all participants reported willingness to get tested and recommend the service to others. Almost all were likely or somewhat likely to recommend services to pregnant teens. Over 27,000 people used the Planned Parenthood widget that was embedded on East Los High's homepage during the first month the show was airing. Also, traffic to the website Stay Teen, which was also embedded on the websites, traffic doubled on the day it premiered. 48% visited the eastlosshigh.com webpage, where we shared a lot of different resources, and 81% shared and recommended the resources that they learned about. And the finding that came out of that lab experiment was that transmedia, that multi-platform storytelling strategy, was the most effective format of narrative presentation, significantly over and above all other formats when it came to condom use. And so, you know, we really see this as I'm hoping that you see East Los High as an example of how this methodology can address an issue like climate change, and I'm excited to talk about that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Great. But I don't have to stand behind that. One of the most important things I think Kathy did not say is that this is the first of the soaps that have been done in this country using the kind of rigorous preparation that is done overseas when we do it. So, and I sat in on some of these things where the writers, by the way, all the writers were Latino. Every one of the writers was Latino, at least when I was involved. And they were not only writing about stories, they were writing about their own lives, clearly. And I had a chance to talk with them. One of them in the original group 5 years ago was 16 and got pregnant. And so when she wrote about these things, it was there. And so I am so proud of what you started and what's gone on in this and what is now showing us the way over here. And aren't you pleased, Al, that your stuff has now gone all this way, what you started back in with the kids punching those toys, you know? Now, is David Festa in the house?
Yes.
There is a David Festa. He's our next guest, and after David, we're going to take a break so that you can devour the food that's in front of you now and tempting you. You can start now if you want, but I mean, we will take a break after that. Then after, when we come back, after about 10, 15 minutes, we will open this up to the floor. I know a bunch of you must have questions and want to ask questions and want to make observations. This is going to be your turn now to take over the whole show. So just remember that. Don't go, because it's going to be your chance to find out whatever it is you want to find out. This group, as you know, as you've seen, as you heard, is a unique resource. And my wanting to be here was because I knew this was going to happen. And I've so enjoyed hearing from way, way back where I was very involved to what's happened since, when I've just been an admirer of it. So thank you all for your presentations. And David Festa is the executive, I'm going to read this because I've never met David before, is the executive vice president of Ecosystems Resilience for the Environmental Defense Fund. EDF is an amazing organization, has done such great work down through the years. And if you're interested in environmental stuff, this is a good guy to know. So I'm pleased because I haven't heard David before. I've not met him. I am very anxious to hear his remarks. David, would you kind of join us up here? Thank you very much.
Glad to rectify this oversight that we haven't met yet.
That's right.
I don't know how that happened.
People know how to avoid me.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's quite humbling to be in front of all of you. If it's okay, I'll give you just a quick run through of why I said yes to standing up on this stage, with what could be an otherwise quite intimidating cast of characters. So for all my life, I have been interested in the intersection of the environment and business and society, and how we improve that. I started off as a journalist. I wrote for a magazine called The Economist, covered a whole bunch of things, but really focused in on sort of the intersection between business and environment, government and the environment. From there, I went back up my master's at a small Stanford wannabe called Harvard, and then we even copied your color, I don't know. And from there, bounced around a little bit, wound up in the Clinton administration, was in the Commerce Department, where part of my job was to be, as we said at the time, the reasoned voice of business in environmental debates. And now I am at the Environmental Defense Fund, where I help run all the work we do on ecosystems. So my passion has been really trying to help people understand what's at stake and then get them to do something. And being coming out of a good academic background, I was certain that, of course, if I just explained it, it would all make sense, and we'd be on our way. I don't need to tell all of you that that is the least effective way of getting people to do things. So I have been borderline obsessed with the idea of behavioral economics, social decision making, and how we harness those tools to actually create the change that we're after. And clearly, we have a room full of people who really understand how to change behaviors. And I was asked today to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do to help with climate change. But in listening to and I'm happy to do that, but in listening to the conversation, it dawned on me that one of the things that I wanted to actually do is ask you to help me. And what I mean by that is, okay, we know how to change behaviors, so what behaviors do we want to change? Let's put on hold for a minute the actual actions, the things but what behaviors do we want to change, and why is this so hard with climate change? I added up sort of 3-4 major reasons. The first is that the issue has become so incredibly political. And in fact, you can tell what people's political points of view are by what they think about climate change. It's an incredible correlation. And that makes it virtually impossible to get anything done. Now, the work that I do, I only work in red parts of the country. And that's because that's where so much of the habitat is. And so if you're working on ecosystems, you wind up working in these red parts of the country. And I have been in conversations, I'm going to stylize it a little bit, but it almost goes something like this, don't you think climate change is happening? And the answer is, oh, absolutely not. I will never vote for Hillary Clinton. What? But it isn't far from that. Obviously, a slight exaggeration, but there's such a close tie. And what's happened is it's not because the political or the environmental values are that different. And environmental values are actually very much the same. I'll give you an example. We did polling in rural counties that went heavily for Trump. And one of the questions we asked them is, what do you think about the Endangered Species Act? We tried to think of what's the biggest boogeyman we could possibly come up with, the Endangered Species Act. What do you think of the Endangered Species Act? We were astonished to find that 80% of Trump voters said they supported or strongly supported the goals of the Endangered Species Act. 80%. So then we said, well, there is one problem with polling. People say all kinds of things, but then when you really press them on it, they make other decisions. So then in the polling, we said, well, did you know that Joe's farm down the street had to go out of business because of the Endangered Species Act? Painting the horror stories. Well, of course, support for the Endangered Species Act did drop, but it stayed in the 50s. Even after we tried to convince them that it was a bad idea, it still stayed in the 50s. So what that says to me is that there's a true environmental stewardship value that we share as a nation. The problem is it's become disconnected from the political voice. So one of the behaviors is reconnecting those values to the political voice. So another reason why this has been difficult is that we have somewhat obsessed on just one side of the challenge of avoiding the catastrophic impacts of climate change. And that side is looking at the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere and having to get those down. We really need to do that, But that's just one side, because even if we succeed in hitting the atmospheric levels of carbon that the countries, the world has agreed to in the Paris agreements, the recent Paris agreements, we still will have catastrophic impacts unless we begin working on adaptation and resilience. Just like people need to be resilient, our societies need to be resilient, and ecosystems themselves need to be resilient. And once you start thinking about what can we do today to start preparing for a future, a changing future, there's all kinds of things that you can do that don't require signing up for a carbon tax or some of these other things that have become quite political. In fact, with our work with farmers, and this is documented in a book that came out by one of my colleagues called Rancher, Farmer, Fisherman, one of the things that we found is when we first started working with these ranchers and farmers, they said, the only thing we're not going to talk about climate change. Yeah, don't go there. So fine. We want to talk about your role as stewards in the environment. And we began to talk with them, and they began to show us what they were doing. We celebrated their success stories. And now today, they are putting us forward to their colleagues and saying, you've got to listen to these guys talk about climate change. So that is a major change. But that's because we started with these things about what can they do to increase their soil health? What can they do to help prevent flooding? What can they, these things that don't require them to publicly admit that this is driven by climate change. I love this story about, do you want more kids? No. If you get pregnant, are you going to be sad? No, I'll be fine. How do you hold those? It's the same thing. I see it all the time. Is climate change happening? Absolutely not. What do you think about flooding? Oh yeah, it's getting worse. Or what do you think about, oh, well, the climate's changing and my crops are coming in earlier or later or whatever. We are able to hold this cognitive dissonance in our head and feel just fine about it. We need to break through that. And I think we can if we start talking about both sides of this coin on climate change. All right, third reason. Avoiding the catastrophic impacts of climate change requires individual action. But unlike some of the goals of the work that we've been seeing today, individual action isn't enough. We have to take action as a society. And we have to do some really difficult things. We've got to move carbon out of our economy, and we have to think differently about nature. Mostly we think about nature just as a society, not anybody in this room, but as a society, we generally behave towards nature as if one of two things is true. Either A, we need to protect ourselves from nature. We need to build a big levee, we need to do big engineering project. We need to protect ourselves from nature, or we need to protect nature from us. And so we're going to put nature over here, and we're going to draw a little line around it and say you can't farm there, you can't ranch there, you can't do anything there except maybe go look at it. And over here, we're going to build big walls and put concrete down and protect ourselves from nature. Kill all the wolves. There's all kinds of things in this category. And what we really need to do is actually reintegrate the environment back into our economy and back into our lives. See it as something that's a partner of ours and celebrate nature that's all around us. If you go in your backyard, even if it's a condo, there's an incredible diversity of life there. And learning how to reconnect with that, I think, is a really key thing. I'm going to try to bring all of this together in one example. Well, I guess I said, so what behaviors would I like to see? Well, first of all, taking personal responsibility, accountability for your own contributions, depoliticizing the issue, but really celebrating the art of compromise instead of the bluster of showmanship. I think that is a really critical thing, because solving climate change isn't going to be about one magic, a magic bullet. If we just do this, if we just do that. No, it's going to be, it's really changing our relationship to nature and being willing to make short-term sacrifices and changes, transitions, in order to have long-term benefit. And really being able to help people conceptualize what those long-term benefits are. So I'm going to try to make this concrete by an actual example of something that we've done in coastal Louisiana. Coastal Louisiana is ground zero for sea level rise and the other impacts of climate change. They have it's also a deeply conservative state, about as deep red as you can get. And they are losing land at a tremendous rate. Well, everyone knows that. They can't avoid that. So the state wrote this thing called the master plan, the coastal master plan. And it was a 50-year plan for how they're going to save the coast. It was based on an open, if dirty secret, that no one was ever going to have to move, and that we were going to be able to maintain the delta in the Mississippi Delta in its current state. No one believed that. But that was the premise upon which the plan was based. And we talked to a number of the people responsible for writing the plan, and we said, you've got to talk about the fact that people are going to have to move. We're going to have to really make some big changes. And they rightly said, if we sit here in Baton Rouge and start telling people that you're going to have to move and you're going to have to move, but you're okay, you can stay there, it's going to be dead in the water. And they were actually right. So what we did, and of course in that deeply conservative state, you couldn't really have a conversation about climate change. So what we did was we put together this little thing that we called Changing Course. It was a design competition, and we invited the most at-risk communities to come together. We provided them with the best engineers, the best scientists, whatever they wanted, they could have, and say, in 50 years, what do you want this delta to look like? And how would you make the choices to do that? You can go online and check it out, changingcourse.com. And these are everyday people, right? These weren't experts. These are everyday people who actually live in the parishes that are going to be affected. They also worked with the navigation interests. The Port of Louisiana is the world's most important port in terms of moving food and energy. No port in the world moves more food and energy through it than the ports of Louisiana. They brought in the navigation industry. They brought in the civic folks. They brought and really worked it through together. And over a 2-year process, came up with 3 finalist designs. And the amazing thing is, even though they differed in some of the specifics, they all agreed on a number of really important principles. The first one is, hey, we can have a sustainable delta, but it needs to be smaller. We're gonna have to retreat. And people are gonna have to move. And then they began to ask questions about it. Well, how can we help people move? And they did very creative things like ask people, well, people retire in different places and they don't leave feeling defeated. How do they? Well, they go and visit a place and then they say this was really fun and they get their friend to come and they back. Why can't we identify where the lands are that are going to be protected in the smaller, more sustainable delta and begin to offer incentive packages for people to go hang out up there? There was a whole variety of these that people, just everyday people, were thinking up. So we did a big presentation of the plan. The state officials were there. And what they came to us and said afterwards was, that project broke their log jam. And by the way, it also talks about part of the reason for this happening is climate change. Part of it is the impact of the oil and gas industry, all these taboo subjects. But they said, look, we're just saying that this is the effect. We're not saying you're bad for that, but we have to acknowledge that's what's going on. So the new master plan has come out. It acknowledges climate change. It takes some really important steps towards the kind of projects and thought processes and conversations that have to happen to create a retreat and a hardening. It's not just about putting in more wetlands. There are levees and dikes that need to be built. But it was really an example of how we're able to engage everyday citizens and have them take some very brave stance, be in some very difficult conversations, but come out with something that people felt really good about. I'd like to know how to replicate that at scale. And I think some of these ideas, I think we sort of, by not exactly throwing darts at a board, but we didn't have the expertise that you guys have. And I'm very excited to think about what we could do with that kind of expertise replicated over many, many places. So I'd like to stop there if that's okay, and let people have a bite to eat, and then get to my favorite part of any meeting, which is the Q&A.
Thank you very much. Just remember that there's so much more to find out about from each other now and from the panel. When you come back, I'm going to ask the panel to sit all up here, the ones, all of you that were speaking, so you can see them and they can see you. Okay, time out.